This week on the West Block, the economic impact of COVID-19.
Is the government willing to provide Canadians with an update as to how they will get Canada's fiscal track back under control when this pandemic is over?
It's deja vu all over again. We've heard yet again the same economic arguments that the Conservatives have been making for years.
We're working hard to preserve our employment and our economy for the long term.
Then, China.
While we advocate for the release of the two Michaels who have been arbitrarily detained by China in retaliation for a judicial system that is independent.
Great to be back.
And the Conservative leadership race. The federal government has spent billions of dollars to supplement wages, help small and medium-sized businesses, and provide financial aid to both students and seniors.
We all understand that this is a crisis that is hitting really hard on businesses right across the country. And we know that if our economy is to come back, we need a large number of those businesses to hold on and to make it through this pandemic.
So how much more is the government going to spend, and when will we find out the shape of the government's finances? Joining me now to talk about this from Toronto is Finance Minister Bill Morneau. Welcome to the show, Minister.
Thanks for having me, Mercedes.
Minister Morneau, your government didn't release a budget because of the pandemic, and so far you haven't released a fiscal update. Can you give Canadians a ballpark sense of the state of Canada's finances? Because we're hearing a $252 billion deficit and a $3 trillion debt. Those numbers are extraordinarily high.
Well, let me just start by saying that we're obviously in a time where the economic situation is very fluid. What we've worked hard to do is to make sure that we are giving Canadians a sense of how we're supporting them, how we're supporting individuals, how we're supporting businesses. We're giving as much transparency as we possibly can on the cost of the measures that we're putting out, estimates and then updates as we go out to Parliament and to Canadians. We think that's really important. I can tell you, though, that right now, because of how rapidly things are changing, it is difficult for us to have a clear understanding of the exact economic situation. We don't want to have false precision in an economic and fiscal update. We're working hard to get to an understanding of where we're at so that we can then take a look at the measures and give a good sense of where we're moving to. So that's work that's ongoing, and when we have a date, we'll be out with it, and that's something I'm looking towards.
Do you think that that date will be before Parliament rises for the summer?
Right now, what I can tell you is that we are obviously updating our scenarios every single day, making sure that we understand where we're going. It is certainly something that we're working on. I don't know yet when that date will be because we're trying to make sure that we can have a picture of where the economy is going. So that work is ongoing, Mercedes. I don't have a date yet, but we'll be certainly continuing to inform Canadians about the measures we're taking, the costs and the expected supports and how important those are. So that'll be our daily approach to transparency.
Okay, so I guess we'll see if parliamentarians get a chance to look at that before the summer break. But speaking of government programs and moving forward, one of the things you have to start thinking about at this point as the finance minister is how do you start paying down all that money that's been spent? Is your government looking at raising taxes?
Well, no, we're not. And I think although, of course, we need to think about the challenges we will eventually face, I will tell you that we are very focused now on the supports that we put in place for individuals and for businesses and on how we move towards a new sense of normal. So that focus initially has been on things like the emergency response benefit for people, things like the financing for small businesses, the credit, or for large businesses that you saw us release this week. I'm very much in the mode now of thinking about what are the next steps. So with the wage subsidy, we announced an extension to the end of August. I want to make sure that we think about how that extension should move forward. What are the conditions that will allow for us to get back to work in a gradual and responsible way so that we can get to that new normal? So that work is critically important right now as we think about supporting individuals and businesses, but doing it in a way that creates the right incentives for us to get back to the things we want to get back to, which is leading a life, notwithstanding the challenges we're facing, that is moving into a different stage and a new normal.
And speaking of supporting Canadian businesses and Canadian individuals, when you were first looking at how to deal with the pandemic, you wanted to pass some pretty extraordinary legislation that finance officials said you wanted so that you could make sure you had a check and balance on the banks. I'm curious to know, at this point in the pandemic, Minister, are you satisfied with how Canadian banks have behaved, and do you think that they've stepped up to the plate?
Well, I've been working closely with the banks through the entire time of this pandemic, obviously pushing them to move forward. We've put an awful lot of liquidity out into the market through the Bank of Canada, through the CMHC, and we want the banks to actually use that liquidity to help their clients, their customers. So, there's as with anything, it's a work in progress. I've seen a significant number of mortgage deferrals, which is appropriate for this time. We've obviously seen banks come forward for people who are experiencing credit card challenges and cut those credit card interest rates in half. We're going to need to continue to push banks to be supportive of their customers. It's in their interest as well. When we put forward programs like the large enterprise financing, which we put forward this week, it's very much structured so that banks will support their clients first, and that we will only be the source of credit for organizations that are out of other sources. So that working together continues to be important. We've seen them step forward. There'll always be more to do for the banks, for the government, and we're working together as best we can to make sure that happens.
Sounds like you think there's some room for improvement there, but we have to move on to our last question, Minister. There's been a lot of concern about state actors buying out Canadian companies, things like oil companies, which we saw the Saudis getting involved in, the Chinese looking at a gold mine up in Nunavut, and now a warning from CSIS that state actors could be looking at buying up Canadian bioscience companies that your government has invested a lot of money in. I know you have a strategic review in place to make sure any foreign sales are looked at during the pandemic. But given that a lot of these companies are going to continue to be vulnerable beyond that, are you looking at extending that strategic review?
Well, right now, what we're trying to do with this and with other measures is think about the emergency time period. So that strategic review during this time period is critically important. We need to make sure that we protect our economy for the long term, and that means protecting it for jobs. It means protecting it for our continued ability to have a vibrant and healthy economy. So that's critically important. We're not making decisions about long-term structural issues during this time of the economic crisis. We do have measures that were already in place to review foreign acquisitions before we got into this crisis. Of course, those will continually need to be considered. What's most important, I think, is that we focus ourselves on the issues that we have right now, and that's what we're doing, and we're going to continue doing it.
Okay, Minister Morneau, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Okay, thanks very much. Take care.
Still to come, a conversation with leadership candidate for the Conservative Party, Peter MacKay. But first, China, COVID transparency, and now month 18 for 2 Canadians who have been detained by Beijing. What should Canada do?